Vogel here for Stand to Reason, and thanks for being part of our show today. First, I'm going to make a commercial so I don't forget it later in the show, but it's a quick one. I want to bring you up to date on the numbers for the Minneapolis reality coming up in a little more than 2 weeks. We just finished last weekend. The reality in Seattle, unbelievable, absolute sellout, fabulous. And a lot of times the Friday night is the high point, and then it kind of, in my view, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit. Then it's the opposite. Friday night was great, and then it just got better and better and better until the final application. This is an event whose theme is "It is written." So every season we have a different theme for reality. This time the theme is the reliability and the authority of the Word of God, and virtually every single talk is geared towards that end, establishing that. What a great event it is too. And then the final event is when when Tim and Alan do the final plenary session, and they make the point that the Bible was not written to be defended; it was written to be read. Which, no duh, but then offers some very, very practical insights into that aspect and to help people, the young people, everybody at the conference move forward. You don't want to miss this conference. Of course, we have our own team there. We have Jay Warner Wallace on board again, and we have Jason Jimenez and Megan Allman, and it's a great event. If you want to go to Minneapolis, November 8th and 9th, it's 1 week earlier than it usually is. We've already got 2,728 people signed up for that. We still have 2.5 weeks to go before the event. So still room to go. We can hold about 4,000, and every year we just about hit that. So we're looking for a great event there in Minneapolis at Grace Church, Eden Prairie. And, of course, in the spring, we have Dallas at February 21st and 22nd. We have Philly, March 21st and 22nd. And now we have Dayton, Ohio, opening up in April 25th and 26th. So that's the heartland. We haven't had a reality there, and this was an opportunity we didn't want to miss, so we took it. So that's the layout here for reality, finishing up the fall and then next spring as well. Incidentally, Alan Schleman is going to be speaking at the Unapologetic Evangelism Conference in Saginaw, Texas, Saturday, October 26th. All right, so that's this Saturday, right? And he'll be speaking at the Ratio Christi College Prep in Burnsville, Minnesota on Wednesday, November 6th, the following week or so. John Noyes will be speaking at the Chinese Bible Church in San Diego on Sunday, October 27th. That all coming up. And if you want all the details on that, go to str.org/events, and everybody's schedule is available for you there. Now, I read an article this week. In fact, I reread it again just a few moments ago. That's a little bit hard to believe. And this is in the category of truth is stranger than fiction. The problem is that I'm concerned that a lot of people are going to be, well, the first phrase that comes to mind is taken in by this. And I don't know that this is meant to be deceptive, but it's odd. It is meant, I think, to communicate a deep concern about the consequences of the Dobbs decision with the Supreme Court that reversed Roe versus Wade and threw the issue back into the hands of the states, upon which a number of states, including the state of Texas, banned abortion. And now we have initiatives coming up here in the election cycle in states, including, I'm not sure if it's including California, but a number of states, I think, are voting on, I know in Arizona, they're voting on a constitutional amendment to enshrine abortion as a constitutional right in those states. So it's still a big deal, and certainly a hot potato, a hot button issue in the election coming up. But this article, I I feel like I just want to read portions of it to you and let you think about what I don't even know how to say this. Um, what the shell game is. Maybe that's the best way to do it. The shell game is, it's a sleight of hand trick where you have the shells with the bead underneath and you move them around. And I think that's what we have here. Although the author, Deidre McPhillips, I don't think believes that she's doing this, nor anyone that's involved in this article, but it's a rather bizarre piece put out by CNN yesterday, October 21st. I'll just read you the headline and then I'll pause for a moment for it to sink in, because this is one of those articles that I think careful thinking people, regardless of your personal convictions about spiritual things or moral issues like abortion, ought to see right through. But apparently lots of people haven't. And I'm mystified. I'm just mystified by this article being presented in a serious way and almost as a warning about the negative consequences on children who have been born since Roe versus Wade was reversed and states have banned abortion in their state. Here's the headline: Infants died at higher rates after abortion bans in the U.S., research shows. Let me read that again. Infants died at higher rates after abortion bans in the U.S., research shows. To which my immediate response is, no duh. Of course, if you ban abortion and a lot more children are born as a result of not killing them in utero, then there are more children who are subject to dying after birth because they weren't killed before birth. So let me read. To me, that's all you need to know. Just read the headline. You don't need to read anything more. But I will. In the year and a half following the Supreme Court Dobbs decision that revoked the federal right to an abortion, and by the way, I don't think that's an accurate way of characterizing it, because the Dobbs decision did not revoke the federal right to abortion. There was no federal right to abortion. What was construed in Roe versus Wade was a de facto constitutional right to privacy that had a practical impact on a person's decision to terminate their pregnancy. So there was no federal right to abortion, which was revoked. Rather, the Supreme Court concluded that there was no right to an abortion under any other justification like a right to privacy in the Constitution. That was bad law, and they just reversed it. Nevertheless, just pointing out language that affects the way we think about revoke the federal right to abortion. Anyway, in the year and a half following that decision, hundreds more infants died than expected in the United States. New research shows the vast majority of those infants had congenital anomalies or birth defects. All right. Now, what is a congenital anomaly or a birth defect? This is a defect or an anomaly physically that a child has when the child is born. Now, what is often the practice is amniocentesis is performed on a pregnant woman to find out if there's any congenital defect or abnormality, birth defect. And in light of that, in many cases, the mother decides to terminate the pregnancy. Now, that's just a euphemism, of course, for killing the handicapped baby before the baby is born with a handicap. Now, I think there probably will be some people that will object to the way I just put it, but I'm not putting any spin on it. I'm trying to be as precise and clear as possible because that's what's happening. Women find out their baby has a congenital defect and then says, I want an abortion because I don't want a handicapped baby. Well, the baby is already handicapped. It's the baby just hasn't been born yet. So you kill the baby before the baby's born in order to avoid having a child that you have to raise with a handicap. What's where is there any distortion in that characterization? Now, this reminds me of what has taken place in Iceland, which has very liberal abortion laws. And, well, a year or so ago, they were proudly proclaiming how they have virtually eliminated Down syndrome in Iceland. Yes, Down syndrome's almost gone. There's only 1 or 2 or 3 children born a year with Down syndrome. Isn't that great? Well, how is that? Did they eliminate the cause of Down syndrome? Therefore, children are no longer born with that, except for in rare cases? No, that's not what happened. They've eliminated Down syndrome babies before they were born. Amniocentesis, search and destroy mission. They find out which children have Downs and they abort those children. So that isn't really a healthcare success. It's just simply saying we are eliminating these children before we have to deal with them after they're born. We eliminate them in utero, all right? Next paragraph. Did I read this one? Earlier research, spurred by CNN investigative reports, found that infant mortality spiked in Texas after a 6-week abortion ban took effect in 2021. And experts say the new data suggests that the impact of the bans and restrictions enacted by some states post-Dobbs have been large enough to affect broader trends. And that's what they're getting at. Here, they noticed immediately this trend in Texas, and now they've noticed it in other ways, okay? In a new paper published Monday by JAMA Pediatrics, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association, their pediatrics version, one professor of epidemiology, and associate dean of research with the Ohio State University College of Public Health compared infant mortality rates for the 18 months following the Dobbs decision against historical trends. They found that infant mortality was higher than usual in the U.S. in several months after the Dobbs decision and never dropped to rates that were lower than expected. All right. In the months that infant mortality was higher than expected, they give those months, rates were about 7% higher than typical, leading to an average of 247 more infant deaths in each of those months. Now, again, I'm just repeating all the same information, but all they're basically saying is since abortion was banned, more children are being born. And if more children are being born, that means more children with congenital defects, brackets, which would have been destroyed before they were born in the past, before the ban, close brackets, are now being born and dying after they're born. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Notice how they're making it look like um, the pro-life point of view or impact causes more babies to die. If abortion is banned, every baby that is not aborted lives, at least until that baby's born. And some of them are going to die because they have congenital defects that are inconsistent with life. But why is that remarkable? Why is that even newsworthy? Congenital anomalies can range from mild to severe cases, and some of the most common types can affect an infant's heart or spine. And in some cases, babies with birth defect may only survive a few months. Yes. Now, they don't survive at all if they're aborted. How about this one? Other research has found, sorry, I'll hold on to your hats here. Other research has found that births have increased in states with abortion bans. Other research, why is research necessary to come to this conclusion? If abortion is banned, then more babies will be born. No duh. And it continues, experts say that some of that increase is linked to a disproportionate rise in the number of women who are carrying fetuses with lethal congenital anomalies to term. Of course, these are congenital anomalies that will cause the death of the baby, but the baby will be dying from the anomaly and not at the hand of the mother and the doctor. And then there's more talk here. I'm not going to keep reading this because it's just goofy. There's more talk about how now this disproportionately affects those people that are poor that would have normally gotten the abortion. Now, I think what you need to do in circumstances like this is you need to substitute the word abortion, which is it obscures what is really going on. I think you should just maybe use a phrase instead of abortion. And sometimes I will ask somebody who uses the word abortion in this way. I'll say, well, wait, what's an abortion? Well, that's when you terminate a pregnancy. Well, how do you terminate a pregnancy? Well, you get an abortion. I know that's what you said, but what does that amount to? It amounts to taking the life of the unborn human being. So instead of saying the word abortion in all of these cases, why don't you just talk about taking the life of the unborn human being? So that whether the pregnancy was wanted or unwanted, we know that many of these are pregnancies that would have ended in, now here's the abortion word, in a mother killing her own baby had people had access to those services. Yeah. Oh. Okay, so they also make a reference to the phrase abortion care here. People who face the more structural barriers in terms of poverty, lower levels of education. There you go. Or food insecurity. By the way, I don't know what lower levels of education has to do with this. Is it like people who don't graduate from high school don't know how pregnancy works? Or if they're in the state of Texas, they can't get an abortion. What does education have to do with it? Anyway, this is all part of the rhetoric. Because now we're hurting poor people because we're not allowing them to take the life of their unborn child. See, notice I substitute the phrase for the word abortion because now we're talking about what really is going on. Anyway, these people with lower levels of education, food insecurity. Where do they get these terms? And other life stressors can't access abortion care. How did the word care get attached to the word abortion? Rhetoric. And these factors also increase the risks of poor pregnancy. Not sure what that means. And birth outcomes. Oh, poor pregnancy and birth outcomes, poor birth outcomes. Well, I don't know what poor pregnancy is. If if a woman can't get an abortion, then she has to carry to term. Now, if she's carrying to term, that increases the chances that the subsequent time of pregnancy after when she would have had the abortion could go south for her. But if she gets the abortion, it definitely goes south for the baby. The baby's dead. And birth outcomes could be you bear a child that has congenital defect, and that child might die, or else you take care of that child with the defect. Well, instead of killing that child before that child's born. These studies are providing a signal that people aren't getting the care that they need. And because of that, there are spillover effects. Dr. Allison Gamil, a demographer, perinatal epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University, who led the research, says here, it's never going to be the case that everybody's going to be able to overcome the barriers of these bans. Okay, you see what they're saying. The barriers of the bans. Look at the liability. When children are allowed to be born, more will die after birth than if they had been killed before birth. That's the translation here. This is kind of like saying, okay, since killing Jews has been banned in Germany, there has been an increase in the number of Jewish adults who have died from heart attack and cancer. Yes, of course. That's because they're not killed by other means, so they die by natural causes. And that happens much more frequently than if you had killed them by other means. More babies die naturally after birth if you don't kill them first before they're born. Once again, no duh. Like I said, truth is stranger than fiction. And what gets me is there are going to be a lot of people who read this article that'll be taken in by the implication, the implicit point that pro-life policies are killing babies. Crazy. Let's go to break. We got calls coming up here on Stand to Reason. Stay with us. I'm still like shaking my head about the article that I just read. It's just so crazy. I just got to look at this line again. Where is it? Other research has found that births have increased in states with abortion bans. Well, that's like saying bachelors. We had a scientific study and we learned that all bachelors are single. What are the chances? 100% of bachelors are single. Okay. All right, let's go to our callers. We got Justin in South Carolina. Justin, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
So my question is in regards to the teleological argument.
Mm-hmm.
I would obviously agree that it is effective in helping people to understand just how unrealistic it is to believe that everything just happened by accident. But I'm still left kind of confused. I believe it was J. Warner Wallace I was watching recently, and he was just throwing out these astronomical numbers of the chances that all of life just happened the way that it is, and how unlikely that is with how fine-tuned everything seems to be.
Right.
And so I understand that is effective, but it's still, to me, it still concedes to the atheist that in theory it could happen on its own. But I'm left wondering, well, how does the matter come to be to begin with, or how did anything start to begin with? So I'm just kind of wondering, does that, are Christians conceding in that argument when we say, here's the odds of it? Or just how would that work?
Yeah, it's a fair question, but I think it reflects a misunderstanding about how odds work, especially in this particular case. If you're talking about flipping a coin, you got 50-50, that it could be heads or tails, and now it might flip like 20 times one, and then the next flip, it's still 50-50, okay? So you're dealing with a very, very kind of a modest kind of statistical element there. But it's still not predictive at all. It just says these are the chances. Like I said, you could go 20 times in a row. All right, but when you're
Yeah.
talking about the fine-tuned constants of the universe, and just for those who may not be up to speed on this, the teleological argument for God is an argument based on apparent design or purpose, telos, in the universe. And so, and one of the significant elements of that argument is looking at the very fine tuned parameters of physics, like the small and weak nuclear force and the force of gravity. And there's a whole bunch of them. All right. And characteristically, they look at one parameter, and then they look, well, what are the chances that this could be so finely tuned here? And then they give an exponential number, like 1 in 10 to the 47th. Okay. Now keep in mind that that's just one of the parameters, not all of the parameters taken together. Part of the argument, and Jay Warner does this too, is to show, like, if just the chances of one of these parameters coming together is really, really infinitesimally small. All right. And keep in mind that when you're dealing with exponential numbers, every time you add an exponential digit, like from 10 to the 50th to 10 to the 51, that's 10 times more. That increases it by a factor of 10. And you add another one, that's an increase of 100 from 50. You go factor of 50 to 52, that's 100 times the 50. That's what it means to be exponential. Okay, so every time you move up with that number, you are massively increasing the liability of expecting that chance is going to accomplish this for you. And when you have flipping coins and 50-50, well, of course, you're going to get a variation, even if it's 100 to 1, or let's say 1,000,000 to 1 or 10 million to 1. You still have people that win the lottery. They still hit the number. But when you have chances that are the astronomical chances that you're talking about here, with just some of these calculations, not taking all of them into consideration. And there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of them, not just physics, but there's also design parameters for other aspects of the solar system, et cetera, the just right planet location and all that. Now you're just you're out of this world, so to speak, in terms of possibility.
Right.
And now I don't know the exact numbers, but the physicists know the number of elementary particles in the universe. All right. And I'm pretty sure it's less than 10 to the 100th. Okay. I think it's 10 to the 60th or something like that. In other words, every single elementary particle, not atom, but every electron, every proton, every neutron. I don't know how they add this up, but they figure it out, right? If you look at all of those, that's this number, which means that the chance of having this particular parameter fulfilled by accident is the same chance of finding the right neutron in the one neutron with an X on it in the entire universe. Now, when you get to that particular point, you realize that the word probability no longer means possibility. It no longer means slim possibility, okay?
Right.
It means impossibility. And those who do these kinds of analysis will tell you that once you get past this number, forget about it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you saw the movie Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey.
Yes.
Do you remember there's a scene in there where he's really got the hots for this gal and she's not interested in him at all. He's a total loser and a weirdo. And so he's asking her, what are the chances? And she
Yes.
says, not good. And he said, well, what's not good? And she said, he mean like 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000? And she goes, 1 in 1,000,000. And then he has a distraught look in his face until he has a little epiphany of thought. And then he says, ah, with a smile, so you're saying there's a chance. Of course,
Yeah.
it's funny because what she's saying is there is no chance. In her mind, 1 in 1,000,000 means no chance. You don't have a chance at all. You're out of
Mhm.
play. Forget about it, you know. Now, if he was going to say there's a chance, then she probably would have said, okay, 1 in 10,000,000. But in one sense, it doesn't matter what number you choose. If you choose 1 in 10 quadrillion or whatever, it's, I don't know if you see, you could still say, so you're saying there's a chance. And actually, what those numbers are saying is there is no chance.
Right.
Okay. So we're not conceding the possibility. You know, this
Okay.
word possibility is at that point becomes just a term of statistical term that has no practical application here. Now it's
Mhm.
impossibility, okay, when you reach that level. But I want to make two more observations here. One of them is that when you're trying to decide what the most reasonable answer for something is, you always go with the odds-on favorite. So
Mhm.
if you had a, let's just say you are going to let me just think. Let's say you're going to play Russian roulette. You had to play Russian roulette, and you get to play with a let's just say oh, a pistol that holds 10 rounds, or say a semi-automatic weapon holds 10 rounds, or one that holds 1 round. Let's say a revolving thing. You know
Mhm.
what? You could have a 1 bullet in 9 chambers, or 9 bullets with 1 empty chamber, you know? So,
Mhm.
if you've gotta choose one or the other, which one are you gonna choose? You're gonna choose the 9 empty chambers with 1 full chamber because the odds are in your favor. Now, you still could die, but the smart
Right.
money is gonna be on the most the with the odds in your favor, okay? Now, we're not talking about 1 in 10 here, or 10 in 1, depending on comparing those 2, pistols. We're talking
Mhm.
about an astronomical figure, so why would you, in a certain sense, bet your life on such a long shot? That's not
Right.
reasonable. It could be that the long shot is the true thing, but it's not reasonable to bet your life on the long shot, okay? That's part of it.
Right.
And secondly, if the long shot meant reasonable possibility, even though it's a very small number, um, the atheist crowd would not be coming up with the multiverse alternative to the teleological argument. The multiverse alternative, or rejoinder, is maybe there's just an infinite number of universes of all different configurations. And when you have an infinite number, every wildly implausible combination is going to be manifest, or so they argue. And we just
Yeah.
happen to be in that universe that was so wildly implausible, but still took place because of the infinite number of options, that we are the ones who evolved to become the individuals, human beings, who reflect on the remarkability of our existence. Okay, and
Mhm.
so that's the rejoinder. Now, this is wildly implausible. Even the
Right.
suggestion. There's no evidence for the multiverse. I guess you could say there might be mathematical evidence for the possibility, but there's no substantive evidence for the multiverse, and there are all kinds of questions that still need to be answered. Okay, what generates all these multiverses? How do you know there's an infinite number? And if there are infinite number, how do you know they're infinitely variable? There are all
Mhm.
kinds of assumptions. Why go there? And the reason they go there is they understand that the fine-tuned constants are so wildly improbable by accident, they have to posit something else in order to bolster their case. So if
Yeah.
there was a reasonable possibility that these fine-tuned constants could have happened by accident, they wouldn't be advancing the multiverse. But they're doing
Right.
that because it's such a compelling argument. In fact, Richard Dawkins says that this is one of the most compelling arguments for God. That's my understanding. I haven't seen the quote proper, but that's my understanding. But I have heard him say, here's the best explanation for why we're here. Luck. We got lucky.
Mm,
That is
yeah,
against all reasonable odds. So
absolutely.
yeah, so that would be my response to that. I don't think that apologists in identifying these very, very small possibilities are suggesting the plausibility. The small possibilities are really meant, they're so small, infinitesimally small that they really demonstrate the impossibility of even one of these parameters being fulfilled by chance. And you've got, in physics, there's probably 8 or 9 of them that I've heard of, and maybe more. And then you have a number of others that have to do with other areas than physics. So,
Yeah. So it sounds like, and tell me if I'm wrong in this, it sounds like when Christian apologists are throwing these exponential numbers around, it's with the idea in mind that the particles necessary to make this possible in theory are already there. Is that right?
I'm not sure I understand
It
that point,
it's
that the particles are already there. The
well,
the
you
stuff
mentioned
of the universe is already existing. This is a teleological argument, not a cosmological argument. So it's not
okay,
about
so
where everything came from. It's why is it so fine tuned?
I think that's where the disconnect for me was.
Ah, I see.
I think I was probably confusing the two and understanding the teleological argument to mean this could have come into being from nothing, but it's very slim odds.
No, that isn't. Yes, you are right that you're getting the two confused, but
Okay,
it's common that people do that. So the cosmological argument is an argument for God based on the existence, the mere existence of the universe, and there is no there seems, and a lot of depends on your personal convictions about this, but there is no way of calculating a a statistical possibility of things coming from nothing. Ex nihilo
right,
nihilo fit. From nothing, nothing comes. All right, and that seems to be an obvious a metaphysical principle. It's not even scientific.
right,
It's metaphysical, and that's a non-starter, I think. To just say that the universe came from nothing doesn't strike me as possible. But if one wants to say it's possible, it certainly doesn't strike me as the most plausible. All right. So
right.
once again, we're trying to figure out what is the odds-on favorite. Now, given the universe that's here, this universe turns out to be appears to be highly designed for a
Yes.
purpose. That's the teleology, and they try to explain that away by invoking the multiverse. So, which I don't think is going to
Okay.
work. But yeah, there are two distinct arguments here.
Yeah, and I was confusing them, and so that's why it seemed to me like the teleological almost concedes to the atheist, and almost it contradicts with the cosmological. That's what I was kind of getting
Yeah,
confused
they're
there, but
apples and oranges, actually.
gotcha. Okay.
Okay, even if
Well,
you
I
get a
appreciate
universe,
your time.
yeah, you're welcome, Justin. Just another thought. Even if you can get a universe from nothing, that tells you nothing about the kind of universe you get. All you have is something
Right.
here. But it turns out now this something looks like it has the fingerprints of a designer on it, and that's an entirely different concern. So we're in a doubly good position. We can explain
Right.
where the universe came from. It came from a self-existent being that himself doesn't need an explanation of origin, where the
Hmm.
universe does, because we all know the universe came into existence. By the way, believers and non-believers agree on that almost
Yeah.
universally. In the beginning God, in the beginning the particles, but there is, I should say, in the beginning God created. On the other side is, in the beginning the particles came into being. but in both cases
Yeah.
you have. So we agree on that, but even if you set aside the problem of things coming from nothing, you still have the nature of the thing that they say came from nothing with no cause, and that is something that looks very highly organized and designed for a purpose. And that's the
Yeah.
teleological argument. All righty?
Well, both arguments are compelling, but you put them together and it's the knockout punch.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I think each of them stands on its own as a definitive, compelling evidence for the existence of God, and this is why it drives me nuts when you hear atheists say there is no evidence for God. I mean, this is
right,
just false. Now, it may be to them the evidence is not compelling, but that's not the same thing as saying there is no evidence.
right.
You can have a person that is charged with a crime, and then through a vigorous analysis of the evidence that seems to implicate that individual, that it turns out that the evidence is not conclusive or can be explained in other ways. But that's very different from saying there is no evidence against this guy, because that person would never come to trial if there were no evidence. So, but this is the
Hmm.
kind of thing that atheists seem to say all the time, and I address that a bit in Street Smarts, but it's very frustrating because it strikes me there's lots of evidence, even if a person doesn't think the evidence is conclusive, it's still not nothing. Make sense?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Thank you
All right,
for your
Justin.
time.
All right, I appreciate your call. Let's take a quick break here, and then we'll get to Christian in Ohio. All right. All right, let's go to Ohio and Christian. Welcome to the show, Christian.
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing all right, buddy. How are you?
Oh, I'm not too bad. Really appreciate you taking my call.
You're welcome. What's up?
Well, so I've got a bit of a big question, I guess.
Okay.
So I will give a little better context than I did in the message that I sent earlier.
Okay.
So I have a friend, a guy I go to church with,
Okay.
who at one point was a Jehovah's Witness, left that organization a while ago.
Uh-huh.
And I had kind of figured, just getting to know him a little bit, that all was kind of behind him, right? We hadn't talked about it a whole lot. I just kind of knew it was a thing. But we're a part of a small group, like men's Bible study discipleship group.
Okay.
And something came up actually after the fact, as we were talking after the class, in which I found out that he actually holds to a lot of those beliefs still from the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. One of which being that Jesus is not God, but rather a created being, and in some form or fashion, Michael the archangel. And we've had a couple conversations, and we've gone back and forth on scripture, and I've brought arguments using the original languages and some history and that kind of stuff. And kind of where our last conversation ended was him kind of being like, okay, well, listen, I'm kind of reading it as it is, and it sounds like you're digging into this and digging into that, and you read the text, and he chose fishermen and people who weren't educated and blah blah blah, and all this stuff just really complicates it all. And so I'm not really sure how to move forward. From that, like if he's not going to accept, digging further with more resources, I don't really know where to go from there.
Well, it seems like he's suggesting that that the ideas that we have about Jesus are very esoteric. They're very hard to understand, and they couldn't be true because normal, ordinary fishermen wouldn't have been able to grasp that. Okay. The first assumption here is that those fishermen were dummies.
Right.
And that's why they were fishermen. Now, that certainly doesn't follow. One of those fishermen wrote a biography of Jesus, and his name was John, the beloved disciple. And this John, in his introduction to Jesus' life, wrote this, speaking of the Word, who he says is the one who became flesh. Verse 14 of John chapter 1, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, right? That's Jesus.
Right.
And so this Word became flesh in Jesus. So he was something before the incarnation, and now he is something in addition. That is, he has a human nature. All right. So what do we know about this one called the Word? This simple fisherman speaks in simple language in verse 3. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. Now, that is as simple as you can put it. And John says it in two different ways, says the same thing, that the Word who became flesh in Jesus is the uncreated creator. He is the creator of all things, and he must be uncreated because everything that was created by him. And he's not going to be able to create himself. Now, there's nothing tricky about that. There's nothing esoteric about it. There's nothing, it's like high-minded, too hard for people to understand. It's just straightforward. So if you're reading the Bible as it is, and you're a stupid fisherman, this is not complicated. What is complicated, it seems to me, is Michael the Archangel became Jesus. Where the heck does anybody get that in any record of Jesus of Nazareth? I don't know. Now, they must have some reason for that.
Yeah, so he brought up a couple different passages that were talking about, they were, prophecies about the end times and that kind of stuff. And we didn't dive too deep into that stuff because that was nearer the end of our last discussion. But I actually brought up those things, like you said, the passages in John where it talks about, the Word was with God and the Word was God, the Word became flesh, those, and then the, nothing came into being,
right, verse 3,
without him. And his thing with that is, well, he still uses the New World Translation Bible, which in John 1:1, it says the Word was with God and the Word was a God.
That's right. But this is why I don't use John 1:1, because now you got to fight about Greek and what the Greek actually says. And that is the only translation in existence that translates that verse that way. But instead of fussing with him about the Greek, that's why I don't do John 1:1, I do John 1:3. And 1:3 reads exactly the same in the New World Translation as the New American Standard or any other legitimate translation. It reads the same. So you can go right to his NWT and open to verse 3, and he's still not going to get away with obfuscating, confusing that passage because it's still straightforward there. So this is, and by the way, my point is that if you look at verse 3 and understand what John is claiming, then that informs verse 1, which may be controversial, having to do with the Greek articles, etc. And so that's why verse 3 is so helpful in this circumstance. So how does he get around verse 3? Forget about verse 1 for the moment. Verse 3 in both translations is the same.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I actually talked a little bit about that, and his response was basically that well, clearly God would have had to have created Jesus, and then through Jesus created everything else.
Okay, so this is called circular reasoning, because clearly that is not the case. Clearly, what the text says is all things came into being through him and apart from him. That means apart from his agency.
Right.
Nothing came into being that has come into being. Now, he may want to read this, and incidentally, I wrote about this in Street Smarts, and there's also an article that's more extensive on our website called Deity of Christ Case Closed. And in that, I talk about this alternative. He says, well, apart from him means he was created. Apart from him, everything else was created, but by him, but not him. He was created by the Father. That's why it says apart from him. But if you read apart from him in that sense, and not apart from his agency, but apart from him, his existence, then it reads like, and apart from Jesus' existence, nothing has come into being that has come into being. Then the sentence reads that Jesus is the only thing that exists, which is nonsense. You can't make that substitution there. That's not what it means, that Jesus is the exception. With the exception of Jesus, nothing came into being that has come into being. See that? It's just like it makes no sense. It's
Right.
Jesus' agency. And that's why he says, well, clearly God had to create Jesus. No, not clearly. Clearly, Jesus was uncreated. That's taking the words at face value, or as you put it, taking the verse as it is, right? Just taking it as it is. All right?
Right.
So he's cheating. Now, if he wants to cheat, he is cheating with the text. Now, if he wants to cheat, I would say, you're cheating there. Now, if you want to cheat, you're welcome to it. All right? Fine. You can do whatever you want. You can believe whatever you want. God's going to hold you responsible. But what you're characterizing the verse to mean is not what it means. And it's obvious to anybody who reads it straight up, straight ahead, just the way John wrote it. All things came into being through Jesus, and apart from Jesus, nothing came into being that has come into being. And the only way to read apart from him that makes sense of the sentence is apart from his agency, which is the point he's making in the first half of that verse. He just says the same thing two different ways. So, if clearly God had to create him first, no. You're just reading that into the text. You're not letting the text speak for himself. And by the way, that's just one place to start on the deity of Christ. The text is just filled with references to the deity of Christ. He is called God in a number of verses, okay? You have these verses that identify Jesus. Oh, I'm just out of time here. You're going to have to, deity of Christ case closed. There's more detail there in the book on Street Smarts has more too. So there's a lot more that can be said about this, but keep hanging in there with your buddy, Christian, and maybe he'll come to his senses on this one, but it's not because the text isn't clear. All right, friends, that's it for this show. Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. Give him heaven. Take care. Bye.